Hey everybody, welcome to the Mana Leak. I'm John as always, and it's that time again. It is time for a set review. Aether Revolt, we are going to be playing pre-releases next weekend, so of course we are going to jump in and review every single card in this set. We're going to start with white today, and then we'll do blue, black, red, green, and then we'll split the multicolored and artifacts in half because there's so many artifacts in this set over the last 2 days. Of course, there are 3 giant disclaimers on this set review. Number 1, this is a limited set review. I will be focusing purely on draft primarily and sealed, because of course we'll be playing sealed first before we ever play the drafts, but I will not be rating these cards on standard or modern or legacy playability or commander playability or anything like that. If I say a card's really bad and it's actually amazing in your commander deck, that's awesome, but that's not what this set review is for. Disclaimer number 2, I have not played with these cards before. Well, I've played with Shock, and I've played with a couple of other cards that are reprinted or are functionally the same, but otherwise I've not played with these cards yet. These are my first impressions. These are how I will be approaching the format during the pre-release. These are how I will be approaching the format for the first draft in the first few weeks, etc. My ratings may change. Of course, I do a top 10 cards that I was wrong on video every single set where, you know, I admit the things that I was wrong on, but these are my first impressions, so be aware of that. Finally, disclaimer number 3, these are my opinions. I may not approach the game exactly the same way as you do, and that's totally fine. That's an amazing thing about Magic. I don't in any way pretend to be the be-all and end-all of Magic card evaluation. I might be wrong. You might be wrong. We all might be wrong. Who knows? I do these videos to help people understand my view of the cards and also to spur discussion. The beautiful thing about set reviews is that people start talking about the cards and discussing them and seeing other people's points of view and not just being stubborn and stuck in their own way. We don't want that to happen. That's been happening a bit too much in the past year, but keep those disclaimers in mind, because we're going to jump into the first card. Up first, we have Aerial Modification. Aerial Modification is 4 and a white for an enchantment aura at uncommon. Enchant creature or vehicle. As long as enchanted permanent is a vehicle, it's a creature in addition to its other types. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and has flying. I'm not a big fan of this just because it does cost 5 mana. Odds are I'll lose to it for sure, but 5 mana is so much to ask for an aura that doesn't replace itself, it doesn't create a creature, etc. There is some decent removal in this set, and you don't want to lose a creature plus a 5 mana aura to some little piece of removal. You probably should avoid this most of the time. It's probably a little bit more playable in sealed than it is in draft, but as I said, I will 100% lose to this on a stupid 7-11 vehicle or something like that, which we'll talk about in a few videos from now. Yeah, I'm not really sold on this. I'm going with a C-. I'm not really going to play this in draft very much. Other people are. That's fine. I'm going to lose to it. It still probably will not be the right decision to actually play this. So C- for Aerial Modification. Up next is Aeronaut Admiral. Aeronaut Admiral is 3 and a white for a creature human pilot, not a dwarf, which I would have expected from the art in a first glance anyways. It's an uncommon, it's a 3/1, it has flying, and vehicles you control also have flying. Now, as we'll see when we get to the artifacts, there are a few vehicles in this set that are, frankly, busted, broken, disgusting. One of them already has flying. One of them, oh my god, I never want to see it have flying. And this is a way to give it flying. Now, there are, of course, a bunch of vehicles that are kind of mediocre that I wouldn't necessarily want to play, and the good ones are at rare and uncommon. And of course, in Kaladesh, we have Renegade Freighter, and that's about it, as long as we're, you know, ignoring rares. So I think ultimately this is probably going to play pretty similar to Gearshift Ace, in that it's going to be a creature that you play just because it is what it is. In this case, it's a 3/1 flyer for 4, which is fine. That's totally fine. I would play that without the additional effect. If you do have some of those busted vehicles that don't already have flying, then hey, you get the bonus. But the bonus isn't something that I'm going to go out of my way to draft for or to expect off of this card. I think it's just a totally fine 3/1 flyer that you'll get some bonus off of here or there. So I'm going to go with a C+ on it. I think you'll probably always play it when you have it, but you'll pick it up maybe like mid-packish. Aether Inspector is up next. Aether Inspector is 3 and a white for a creature dwarf artificer at common. It's a 2/3, it has vigilance, and when Aether Inspector enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy. Whenever Aether Inspector attacks, you may pay 2 energy. If you do, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. This is part of a cycle. It's obviously a mirror of the thriving cycle, where instead of getting a counter, you get a servo if you pay the 2 energy. I think this cycle's much, much, much worse. Speaking to this one specifically, 4 mana gets us a 2/3 vigilance, which is not really impactful. It's attacking on turn 5 into things that will kill it, or at least just kind of bounce it away. It's not really going to be attacking that much effectively, which begs the question of why are you even playing this? If you're not attacking with it, you're not making the servo, and on turn 5, what is a servo gonna do for you? It just seems really mediocre to me. Maybe playable if you really need the energy, or if you need a way to make a servo. We're gonna talk about Improvise, one of the Aether Revolt mechanics, a little bit later, but ultimately I think you probably just leave this out unless you're desperate, and you pick it pretty late in the pack. This is certainly no thriving Ibex. Aether Inspector, I'm going to give a C-. Up next, we have Aether Geode Miner. Aether Geode Miner is a 1 and a white creature dwarf scout at rare. She's a 3/1, and whenever Aether Geode Miner attacks, you get 2 energy. Pay 2 energy, exile Aether Geode Miner, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. This is so close to a flavor win. How terrible is she as a miner that she heads off for a bit and comes back with nothing? She doesn't come back with a gold token or anything like that. That's dumb. Anyways, she's a 3/1 for 2, and which are stats that I really like. I really love 3/1s for 2s in white in aggressive decks. The flickering trick lets her avoid trouble, as well as enabling revolt, which we'll talk about in a bit. I don't think she's going to be first pickable a ton of the time, because she's way more sort of utility, aggressive general creature than a real bomb, but I think she's a totally fine early pick. Once the pack's removal has kind of been taken up and any bombs have gone away, I'll always be happy playing her. As I said, I love 3/1s for 2, and the effect is pretty darn cool. If you do have some sort of dedicated revolt engine going on, then she can definitely help out there as well. But boy, I wish she actually came back with something that she mined. Total flavor fail, but a solid B-. Airdrop Aeronauts are up next. Airdrop Aeronauts are 3 white for creature dwarf scout at uncommon. They're a 4/3, they have flying, and they have revolt, one of the new mechanics in Aether Revolt. When Airdrop Aeronauts enters the battlefield, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, you gain 5 life. So revolt is always, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, something. Some of it is on creatures when they enter the battlefield. Some of it is on creatures or enchantments that check every upkeep or every end step. Some of them are on instants, etc. It's very similar to Morbid from Innistrad, and I believe it was in one of the conspiracy sets where if a creature died, something else would happen or something additional would happen. This is an interesting mechanic. So it checks permanence. That means creatures leaving the battlefield, dying, being bounced temporarily, like flickering, etc. It counts enchantments going away. It counts tokens going away. It counts any permanent going away for any amount of time from the battlefield. I don't know how I feel about this mechanic exactly. I do worry that your opponent controls it a little bit too much, because I think creatures leaving the battlefield is going to be one of the main ways that this gets turned on, just like Morbid, in fact making it very similar to Morbid. And of course, you without flickering abilities aren't really going to be the one determining if your creatures leave the battlefield. That being said, white is one of the best ways to be flickering your creatures. Blue, of course, has some ways to do it as well. And then, of course, there's some ways to sacrifice permanents. We'll talk about some of these in later videos. Black, of course, will have sack outlets. Blue will have the bounce outlets. Red doesn't have too much to remove things. I guess you're just hoping that your creatures are swinging in and dying regularly. So anyways, when I look at these revolt cards, I typically look at, is the card fine on its own? And then I assume that revolt is kind of a nice upside unless you're explicitly building for it. Now, I do 100% believe that you can build for revolt. You can make a quote-unquote revolt deck. I don't think you would do it for this creature, and there's a lot of creatures that I don't think you would do it for, but there are spells and there are enchantments that I do like the revolt on. Anyways, this is a 4/3 flyer for 5, which is fine-ish, although I'd prefer a better ability or more reliable ability. You're probably going to play this a little bit more in sealed than draft because sealed is slower. You're going to have less creatures to choose from, but it's fine enough if you do need a creature. The life gain's nice, but I would not go out of my way to trigger Revolt for this. There's one that we'll talk about very shortly that I would 100% go out of my way to trigger Revolt for, but this, I'm playing it on turn 5. If I gain 5 life because something left the battlefield, cool. But I'm not going to spend a card to make something leave the battlefield. I'm not going to throw away a creature. I'm just going to play this as a 4/3 flyer. As I said, I'd probably play it every time in sealed. In draft, it'll depend more on my curve if I can really justify playing this. Probably a mid-pack pick and kind of like a middle-of-the-road C for airdrop aeronauts. Alley Evasion is up next. Alley Evasion is a single white mana for an instant at common. Choose one. Target creature you control gets +1/+2 until end of turn. Or, not and, or return target creature you control to its owner's hand. Now, hey, look at that. We have a Revolt enabling card immediately after our first Revolt card. This is an okay combat trick, but it's not one that I think is an auto-include. If you really want a way to enable Revolt once, this is fine. It also helps you dodge removal. You can flicker the creature, etc. Or rather, bounce, not flicker. It doesn't come back. You will have to recast it. The +1/+2 pump is neither here nor there. It's just not a card that I'm going to go out of my way to play. You've heard me talk about this in previous sets for something, but I don't remember what, where I don't want to play bad cards or mediocre cards to enable other cards. And this is a relatively mediocre trick to enable your Revolt cards. If you're desperate for a way, you can go for it. If you need a 23rd card, here you go. But ultimately, I think this doesn't make the cut too often. But it's there if you want it. I'm going to go with a C-. I'm going to cut this more often than not. Up next is Audacious Infiltrator. Audacious Infiltrator is 1 and a white for a creature dwarf rogue at common. It's a 3/1. Audacious Infiltrator can't be blocked by artifact creatures. We've talked a lot about how I love 3/1s for 2 in white. We already had one with Aether Geode Miner, in fact, and this one I'm going to love as well. Not being blocked by artifact creatures means that servos and such aren't going to be a problem for it. There was a creature like this in Battle for Zendikar that couldn't be blocked by Eldrazi Scions. It was a 3/1, and the 1/1 threat of the format, the Scions, couldn't do anything against it. In this case, the servos can't do anything against it. But not only can the servos not do anything against it, none of the eager constructs or gear hulks or vehicles or anything like that can do anything about this guy. So he's a very, very nice, aggressive 3/1 for 2 in white, which I love. I think it's probably a solid C. You're not going to go out of your way, and even I'm not going to go out of my way to pick this guy too highly. I think it's a solid C. For me personally, it's probably like a C+, but I think it's a solid C. I think it's probably just always playable. In fact, no, I'm going to go for it. It's a C+. Deal with it. C+ for Audacious Infiltrator. Bastion Enforcer is up next. Bastion Enforcer is 2 and a white for a creature dwarf soldier at common. It's a 3/2. End of story. It's just the vanilla white creature of the set. It is a 3/2 for 3 that does absolutely nothing else. Absolutely no. There's just way too much other good stuff going on. You can main deck this in sealed because, again, you're just not going to have, the cream of the crop of creatures to choose from, usually. If you are, you got pretty lucky. But outside of sealed, you're just not going to be playing this. If you're playing this, it's a sign that something probably went wrong. You really didn't get enough creatures and you have to play this. But generally, anything else in your draft pool is probably going to be better than this. So C-. Play it if you are absolutely desperate for creatures, but otherwise avoid Bastion Enforcer. Call for Unity is up next. Call for Unity is 3 white for an enchantment at rare. It has Revolt. At the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, put a Unity counter on Call for Unity. I will, in the future, be shortening Revolt to if you revolted, etc. There's more. Creatures you control get +1/+1 for each Unity counter on Call for Unity. So anthems are very good, very, very, very good. 5 mana is a bit more than you'd like to play, but as long as you can get 1 counter on this, it's fine. Obviously, if you don't get any counters, this does nothing. It's garbage. It's a waste of time. So you 100% are going to absolutely need to be enabling Revolt. You must. You must be playing Aviary Mechanics and Acrobatic Maneuvers from Kaladesh, and some other cards that we'll talk about, maybe even playing Alley Invasion or something like that. You must know that you're going to trigger Revolt. you must. When you get to 2 counters, this is basically Dictate of Heliod, which was fantastic in Theros. Like a lot of these Revolt enchantments, there's a lot of these enchantments that sit there, and they don't do anything until you get counters on them or until you've revolted that turn. So you are going to need to make sure that you are revolting reliably. I would very happily first pick this. I think it's going to very quickly put you ahead in the game. The ideal, of course, is have something leave the battlefield, pop down, call for unity, and then end of turn get a counter on it, and there you go, you've got yourself an Anthem. And from then on, anything leaving the battlefield is just going to get better. Your creatures are going to be huge. Love it. Absolutely love Call for Unity. I think it's a solid B+. I'm not going to go much higher because I don't know about Revolt. I'm pretty darn certain you can build around it, especially in white. So it's probably realistically going to be more like an A-, maybe even an A. But I'll start at a B+ because there is, of course, the potential for it to just do absolutely nothing. So B+ for Call for Unity. Up next is Caught in the Brights. Caught in the Brights is 2 and a white for an enchantment aura at common. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature can't attack or block. When a vehicle you control attacks, exile enchanted creature. So I do believe, although I haven't checked this, so please correct me if I'm wrong, this is the first card picturing imminent roadkill? Anyways, I like this card quite a lot. It's the revoked privileges of the set, but probably slightly worse because the creature does get to keep their keys for vehicles. They can still crew vehicles. But if you have any vehicles, and I find in white I typically have at least 1, maybe even 2. White's one of the quote-unquote vehicle colors, even though vehicles generally have no color. The creature goes away. So it's not going to be crewing any vehicles because it is off in the Nether Exile realm. This is straight up white removal and a pretty darn high pick for me, probably first pickable in many, many packs. I'm going to give it a solid B+. Not quite higher than that just because, of course, they can still crew vehicles. There is enchantment hate. But yeah, this is just straight up white removal. B+ for Caught in the Brights. Consulate Crackdown is up next. Consulate Crackdown is 3 white for an enchantment at rare. When Consulate Crackdown enters the battlefield, exile all artifacts your opponents control until Consulate Crackdown leaves the battlefield. This feels much more constructed sideboard to me than anything else. You all know I was relatively hesitant on main decking artifact removal in Kaladesh, except for Appetite for the Unnatural, which I do main deck, and a 5-mana Oblivion Ring style effect that can be nullified later because a lot of the artifact hate also hates enchantments. It just kind of sounds like a bad idea to me. I'd probably take this mid-pack at the earliest, and I would generally leave it in the sideboard. It's expensive, it's not permanent in any way, shape, or form, and there is built-in hate for it in the format. I just don't see it being that great of a limited card. Constructed, sure, it might have some uses, maybe, but limited, I'm going to put this at a D+. I'm going to pick it kind of mid-packish, late-packish, almost like a Fragmentize, and use it there. Because, of course, Magic Christmas Land, you're going to sweep off like 10 artifacts from the opponent's side of the battlefield, but realistically, you're going to hit 1. Maybe 2 if you're lucky. So it is just kind of like a Fragmentize that you're paying 5 for, and that can be easily nullified. So D+ for me. I'm not going to be too happy with Consulate Crackdown. Conviction is up next. Conviction is 1 and a white for an enchantment aura at common. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+3. Pay a white, return Conviction to its owner's hand. This is very similar to Divine Favor, which was 1 and a white, give a creature +1/+3, and you gain 3 life. So we don't get to gain 3 life, but we do get to pay white to bounce it back to our hand, to throw it on another creature, or to save it if the creature's going to die, etc. It is a Revolt enabler, and it's a Revolt enabler for relatively cheap. But I don't think it's a good card, and of course I don't want to play bad cards to enable other cards. But it's also not terrible. I have played Divine Favor in some formats before. I've never usually been happy about it, so I really don't know where this falls. I think if you have, Call for Unity, and if you have reasons to be enabling Revolt and enabling Revolt every turn, because this, of course, you can enable Revolt with for 3 mana every single turn, then I think it bumps up quite a bit. I think in a vacuum, it's kind of like a D+. I don't think you're going to pick this very highly, and I don't think you're going to pick this and say, aha, I have this. Now I'm going to go find those Revolt cards. I think you only take this if you already have Call for Unity or other reasons to really want to enable Revolt. So I think it's a D+ in kind of your generic deck, even in decks that kind of want to have Revolt triggered once or twice. I think there's just better ways to do it. I think when you already have the things that need to be constantly revolted every turn, then you can much more reliably play this and it becomes more like a C? Maybe even a C+, probably not that high, but maybe. Anyways, this is one that's going to vary really wildly, so make sure that you know why you're playing this. Don't just jam this in every white deck. D+ in a vacuum, some other grade for the decks that want it, like a C, C+ for the revolting decks. Up next is Countless Gears Renegade. Countless Gears Renegade is 1 and a white for a creature dwarf artificer at common. It's a 2/2 and it has Revolt. When Countless Gears Renegade enters the battlefield, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. This is a bear. It's a 2/2 for 2, so it's at absolute worst to see that you'll, almost always play when you don't have something better. It's a pure run-of-the-mill C. The ability is fairly similar to the other common Revolt creatures that we'll talk about in later videos, but I think this one's just worse. The other creatures get a counter if you've revolted that turn, and that's probably better than always getting a servo. It's arguably the fabricate kind of discussion. Do you want the counter or do you want the servo? As well, remember that Ghirapur, Gearcrafter, Eldrazi Spawner, which were all similar to this card, were amazing because they made a flyer, or they were a flyer themselves. There's nothing flying about this card. Now, it's still an artifact, so it's still a body, it's still part of the go wide strategy, it's still part of improvise, etc. I think this is a totally fine mid-pack pick, but I would not go any higher than that. Play it always, but don't rabidly seek it out. So I'm going to go with a C+, a standard bear with an upside for Countless Gears Renegade. Up next is Dawnfeather Eagle. Dawnfeather Eagle is 4 and a white for a creature bird at common. It's a 3/3. It has flying. It's a bird. Why wouldn't it? When Dawnfeather Eagle enters the battlefield, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain vigilance until end of turn. This seems like a decent enough curve topper for a wide white deck, but the price definitely does hurt it a little bit. Still, in a blue-white Flyers deck, this could just be a game ender. It's not a high pick because of the cost, but if you're heading down that blue-white path or a go-wide path or some deck where you are pretty certain that at some point you're just going to swing in with the team and it would be awesome if they were +1/+1 and vigilant, then I think this is a decent pickup. I think it's mid-pack otherwise and sometimes just not playable if you don't have a space for a 5-drop and you won't reliably be going in for that Alpha Strike. I think ultimately it's kind of like a C, maybe a C+, especially in those decks that will want it. But be careful, I don't think it goes in every single deck. So C for Dawnfeather Eagle. Next up is Deadeye Harpooner. Deadeye Harpooner is 2 and a white for a creature dwarf warrior at uncommon. She's a 2/2. She has Revolt. So when she enters the battlefield, if you revolted, then destroy target tapped creature an opponent controls. This seems pretty good. The effect is powerful enough that I'm willing to wait a few turns before casting this for Revolt to be on. A lot of the Revolt creatures, and we'll hear about this in later days, I don't really want to wait to revolt them, because by the time I do that, and I get whatever effect it is, if it's a counter on the creature or I get some extra mana, I'm left with an effect that isn't that impactful and a creature that has come down way too late. In this case, yeah, I might get a 2/2 really late in the game, turn 5, turn 6, turn 7, but I might kill something if I cast this with Revolt and the target is tapped. I think how pickable this is entirely depends on how consistent Revolt is as a mechanic. If it's not consistent, this is going to get hurt. It's going to kind of downgrade to like a C+. I think you're still going to be able to, Revolt at least once. You're going to be able to chump block. A creature will have been tapped because they attacked you. You chump block, a creature's left the battlefield, you drop this down and kill that attacker. I think that is going to still make this consistent enough, even if Revolt itself isn't really that consistent. So I think ultimately this probably will level out at like a B-, maybe even a straight up B, just because of that sort of chump block, cast this, kill that scenario that should be pretty reliable. So I'm going to go with... oh boy, this is tough. B- or B is what I'm really kind of stuck between. I think I am going to go with the B on this, and I will pick it relatively highly, maybe even first pick in some packs. So B for Deadeye Harpooner. Decommission is next. It's 2 and a white for an instant at common. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. Revolt. If a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, you gain 3 life. Now this card's pretty solid because it's unrevolting side is totally fine. You know, it's basically Appetite for the Unnatural. It's 2 and a white instead of 2 and a green. It's instant speed, blow up an artifact or enchantment. The only trick is you don't always get the life off of this, but when you do, it's 3 life, which is 1 better than 2. This is going to be the artifact hate that I probably am most willing to main deck in the format because it's instant speed and it's relatively cheap and there's no conditions whatsoever on what it can hit. It's also a Revolt card where I don't feel like you have to have Revolt to play this card. There are other cards that frankly are only good if you Revolt with them. This one's totally fine by itself. That being said, it is still just, you know, generic artifact hate. I'm not going to give it any higher than a C. You're never going to pick this higher than mid-pack at the earliest, but it is a solid C. Deft Dismissal is up next. Deft Dismissal is 3 and a white for an instant at uncommon. Deft Dismissal deals 3 damage divided as you choose among 1, 2, or 3 target attacking or blocking creatures. 4 mana for 3 damage isn't the best ratio, but it's probably still fine enough for this to be relatively first pickable removal. The fact that you could blow out an opponent by picking off 2, maybe even 3 creatures if they're all X1s or if they have damage or something's going on is a huge potential. This is very similar to Royal's Retribution from Battle for Zendikar, which was basically the same thing, but it was 5 mana for 5 damage that you divided among any number. So you could actually kill 5 creatures with Royal's Retribution, although you never really did. You usually hit 2 things, and I think this can probably hit 2 things. It can hit an X2 and an X1. We'll have to see how that really turns out. It's entirely possible that 3 damage just isn't enough to have the huge blowouts, the multi-creature blowouts. Regardless, it's still 3 damage at instant speed to attacking or blocking. I think it's probably fine. I think it's probably first pickable, but the more I talk about that 3 damage, the less happy I am. I had it at a B originally. I'm going to knock it down to a B minus. It may not be first pickable in every pack now that I think about that 3 damage. I'll keep a very close eye on this because it's so similar to Royal's Retribution. The blow-up potential is there, but we'll see. I'll keep a close eye. Well, I'll start at a B minus for Deft Dismissal. A Mythic is up next, Exquisite Archangel. Exquisite Archangel is 5 white for a creature angel at Mythic. She's a 5/5, she is flying, and she's got an ability. If you would lose the game, instead exile Exquisite Archangel and your life total becomes equal to your starting life total. So of course in Limited, we're talking about snapping back to 20. If you're at 0, if you're at negative 275, she goes away and you go back to 20 life. The game starts sort of over. Now 7 mana definitely hurts it a little bit. And if the format doesn't slow down much, as it was from Kaladesh, then this probably does drop in playability a little bit. Still, if you hit 7 mana and this sticks around, you basically can forget about blocking for a little bit. And also attack with your 5/5 flyer that you happen to have without concern, because if your opponent drops you to 0, you're jumping back to 20. You're going to lose your 5/5. That is a thing, but you're jumping back to 20. It's a really cool card. I love this effect. It's really, really neat. I think it could be a lot of fun, but the mana cost is going to hold me back a little bit. As well, your opponent could attack you down to 2 or 1 or something like that, hold you there, take some damage, waste some time to find removal or a way to remove the angel, and then kill you. So be careful with that. I think it's really fun. Yes, I'm going to first pick it when I see it, but I think realistically it's probably like a B just because of that cost. If this was a different format, it would be a much higher grade. But as far as I'm concerned, the format's not going to slow down a ton. So Exquisite Archangel, a B. Felidar Guardian is up next. Felidar Guardian is 3 and a white for a creature cat beast at uncommon. It's a 1/4. When Felidar Guardian enters the battlefield, you may exile another target permanent you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So you get to flicker something. So I'm guessing a Felidar is an invented antlered cat beast in Magic lore, because I couldn't find any indication that Felidar is a thing in mythology otherwise, but I thought they were only on Zendikar because of course Felidar Sovereign, but apparently they're anywhere. Anyways, this is a 1/4 for 4, which isn't great. 2/4 for 4 is what we're kind of used to, but the flicker effect here is very solid. It hits permanents, so you can flicker enchantments if need be, you can flicker all kinds of stuff. Getting another ETB effect off a creature, triggering Revolt, I see this being a very high utility card. Unfortunately, it's so unimpactful after that. This one I'm really not sure where I take it. I know exactly when I play it. High enter the battlefield count, a need for Revolt, etc. But do I take this and then go down that path, or do I wait until I'm there? I think you could probably somewhat reliably take this a bit highly, like high mid-pack, not first pick or anything ever, I don't think, and then get the stuff later because there are so many things that this will work with, in white especially, as well as other colors in the next couple of packs. So I'm going to keep an eye on this and see how it shapes up. I'm going to start at a B-. I definitely think that it could be lower because it's really low impact after that flicker. This is not Wisp-Weaver Angel or anything like that, but I'll start it at a B-. I think it's a highish mid-pack pick, but I will keep an eye on it because I think it's one of the things that the Revolt decks will be interested in. So B- for Felidar Guardian. Geary Osprey is up next. Geary Osprey is 2 and a white for a creature bird at common. It's a 2/2. It's got flying. That's it. It's a flying bear, which is always just kind of fine. It's a Windrake. It could not possibly cost less or it would be pretty broken, and there's very few abilities that could be stapled onto it for 3 mana. You'll play this most of the time like you would a bear, but you won't go super out of your way to grab it. It's a total role player in blue-white flyers like Windrake. The fact that Windrake is in Kaladesh is a little bit crazy that we could have, just a bajillion Windrake deck. But yeah, Geary Osprey, I think it's a solid C. You'll play it a good amount of the time. A couple of decks might not want it, but in general, you'll play it and be pretty happy, so C. Restoration Specialist is up next. Restoration Specialist is 1 and a white for a creature dwarf artificer at uncommon. She's a 2/1. She's got one ability, which is white and sacrifice Restoration Specialist. Return up to 1 target artifact card and up to 1 target enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. I historically haven't super liked this effect unless it was repeatable or ridiculously cheap or stapled onto a creature, and this one is stapled onto a creature and is relatively cheap. Plus, you do get to have this 2/1 for 2 for a while. Attack in, probably not block. I don't see how it could live without some other support. Use it for a little bit, and then a little bit later when you have the target, or maybe 2 targets if you're lucky, pay a single white mana, throw this away, maybe even trigger Revolt off of it, who knows, and get something back. Maybe recur a Caught in the Brights. That would be pretty good, pretty fine. I'm not going to want to spend a high pick on this still just because I don't super like this effect, but I think this is probably still fine enough to be a C+. I think it'll probably go in most decks, but I also would not take it assuming that I'm going to have awesome, great targets. I would probably make sure to have those targets first and then pick this up kind of late-ish in pack 1 and then maybe a little bit higher in pack 2. So C+ for Restoration Specialist. Up next is Solemn Recruit. Solemn Recruit is 1 white for a creature dwarf warrior at rare. She's a 2/2. She's got double strike. She also has Revolt. At the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Solemn Recruit. So this is a 2/2 double strike for 1 white, which is already totally fine and playable. We've seen various things like this before. Silverblade Paladin, Mirrodin, something or other. I can't remember the name of it. They've always had an ability. They were 1 white for a 2/2 double striker. It's highly, if not first pickable, frankly. The fact that it can get counters, probably in the most reliably, quote-unquote, revolting color, is great. Easily first pick for me, ever so slightly below bomb level because she does start in shock territory, and shock is back, as we'll see during the red set review. But boy, this can just quickly get out of range of that. If you can get a counter on her, she's out of shock range, and one more counter is just in disgusting, you're going to win the game shortly range. So I'm all in on first picking Solemn Recruit. I think she's fantastic. I'm going to go A-, just ever so slightly below the A because she does start relatively vulnerable. So A- for Solemn Recruit. Up next is SRAM Senior Edificer. SRAM Senior Edificer is 1 and a white for a legendary creature dwarf advisor. He's a rare, he's a 2/2, and whenever you cast an aura, equipment, or vehicle spell, draw a card. Meh. I don't care. Auras, equipments, and vehicles are the 3 least played types of cards in Limited. You're going to draw, what, maybe 3 cards off of this if you hit every relevant card in your deck plus have played him first. It's a 2/2 for 2, which is always going to be fine and main deckable. I really wouldn't go any higher than that, frankly. I'm not going to put a bunch of equipment in my deck. I'm going to put 1, maybe 2 vehicles in my deck. And auras, meh. There's a few relatively playable enchantments, but there's just not that many auras. I'll give it a C+ because it is a bear with an upside, but I think the upside's relatively minimal. So C+ for SRAM Senior Edificer. So SRAM is part of a legendary cycle in this set, and every one of these legendary creatures in each color has an expertise. We have SRAM's expertise up next. SRAM's expertise is 2 white for a sorcery at rare. Create 3 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature tokens. But wait, there's more. You may cast a card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your hand without paying the mana cost. That seems a little bit abusable to me, for sure. 2 white for 3 1/1s and a 3/3 if we cast a vanilla creature off of it. Or how about 3 1/1s and an artifact removal, decommission, or a burn spell, or anything in your hand that's awesome. All of those things sound really, really cool. Now, if you whiff and you have nothing, then 2 white for 3 1/1 servos at sorcery speed sounds pretty darn bad. As a result, I'm thinking this is going to be a little bit high variance unless you very purposely build a low curve deck. You make sure that you're going to have 3 or less CMC cards in your hand. I'm going to start slightly optimistically on it at a B-, but the whiff potential is there. Yeah, I'm going to have to see how this expertise and frankly all of the expertises play out, because it's not a great feeling that the cards aren't that good by themselves. So yeah, I'll keep an eye on it. I'm going to start relatively optimistic on this one. I like getting a whole bunch of servos, so B- for SRAM's expertise to start anyways. The final card for white is Thopter Arrest. Thopter Arrest is 2 and a white for an enchantment at uncommon. When Thopter Arrest enters the battlefield, exile target artifact or creature an opponent controls until Thopter Arrest leaves the battlefield. How many pacifism arrest effects can one draft format have? We have Caught in the Brights, we have Thopter Arrest, we have Captured by the Consulate, we have Revoke Privileges. It's insane. This is an easy snap first pick. It's an Oblivion Ring that also hits artifacts. End of story. Solid A for me. There is a decent amount of enchantment hate stapled onto the artifact hate out there, so this isn't guaranteed to stick around as much as it would in other sets, but I think it's still just a snap first pick A. Love it. Thopter Arrest, going to be one of my most drafted cards, unless it's one of those mythic uncommons that I basically never, ever see, like a Harness Lightning, for example. Yeah, Thopter Arrest, solid A. Love it. Super awesome. So that's going to wrap it up for the white set review. White looks really interesting. It has probably the most revolt enablers out there. It has the pacifism effects. It's got the Exquisite Archangel, which I want to play with at some point. I would love to have an extra life in Magic. And not an extra life as in 1 life point, an actual extra game's worth of life. White looks really fun. Let me know what you think of white down in the comments below. As well, definitely share these set reviews. Post them on Reddit. Post them on your local forums. Share them. Get the word out there. That will grow the channel. That will encourage other videos to pop up, all kinds of stuff. If you are new to the channel, welcome. Absolutely welcome. Love having you here. You can check out the set reviews. There'll be one every single day. And then, of course, there's the other 1,000+ videos that I've already uploaded. And I upload several weekly series, drafting, etc. So make sure that you do check all that out. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me on Twitter at @TheManaLeak. That's LEEK, like the vegetable, not the card. You can also find me at Facebook.com/TheManaLeak, Twitch.tv/TheManaLeak. And if you want to become a patron, you can go to Patreon.com/TheManaLeak and donate at several various levels there. Or any level you choose. You can sponsor drafts. If you ever donate over the lifetime of your entire sponsorship, if it takes 1 month or 60 months or whatever, if you donate $60 total, you get a playmat. You get the Mana Leak playmat sent to you. So check that out for sure. As always, hit that like button if you like the content. Click subscribe if you haven't already. And I will see you all tomorrow for the blue set review.